call upon Professor John Marshall.
Fantastic.
You know, whenever I wear one of these sorts of microphones, I feel I should come on, I'm a virgin. Okay, well, please forgive me, but I'm going to move you back a few millimeters, and I'm going to talk about that pink thing that corneal surgeons rest their instruments on. I've been working on the retina, pigment epithelium, Brooks membrane for a very long time, and my colleague Ali Hussain has worked with me for almost 30 years. And this, I think, is now coming to a really interesting time period because we've had a treatment for wet neovascular AMD, but of course the vast majority of patients suffer from the atrophic form. Now, I just want to put perspective here. Lasers were first demonstrated in 1960. And 3 years after the first demonstration was the first eye accident. So lasers are relatively new innovation. It was facilitated by the Goldfinger film, and this is truly international. It's an American laser, a German surgeon, and a Scottish patient. And when I saw lasers and the military, that meant a lot of money, and I thought, I'd be quite interested in working there. So back in the early 60s, I started working with the Royal Air Force on lasers. Now, it was interesting because lasers have developed with lots and lots of different wavelengths, lots and lots of different designs, etc. But you can now choose a laser to work on any part of the eye. You choose the wavelength that will get there, and then you choose the laser design and the physics of the laser to produce the effect that you want. So this is me in 1964, and we started working on monkey eyes and some human eyes that were going to be enucleated in order to determine for the Royal Air Force what lasers would cause eye damage and how we had to protect pilots and aircrew from any potential laser weapons. And the first thing we showed was that ophthalmology wasn't too bad, but fluorescein angiography was better for detecting and sensitivity. But out of those early studies, we developed a database, which meant as a young man, I sat on virtually every laser safety committee in the world, and you can see them listed there. Together with one of my PhD students, we wrote the World Health Organization, United Nations Environmental Program guides on lasers and ultraviolet radiation. So there's uniformity, and it was great. You know, as a young guy, just a PhD, to go around sitting on all these committees, talking to everybody and drawing up the regulations. Great job. But because I was doing that, it meant that I could understand mechanisms. And that meant I could go around the globe, the eye, and publish in lots of different areas. If I got bored in the retina, I'd go to the vitreous, got bored there, I'd go to the lens, got bored there, cornea, etc. And probably the last generation that could flit around like that. But it was really great to be a specialist and a non-specialist. And so you can see there that I had the very first patents on excimer laser for refractive surgery, co-founded the first company that went through the FDA. Now there's another lot of patents on retina, and that's what I want to share with you today. Just remember, 1960, if you were a diabetic with proliferative retinopathy, you had two choices. I'm sorry, it's a terrible disease, go home, go blind, or we have a treatment. We can destroy part of your brain. It's got a mortality rate of 12 to 14%, but it may stop you going blind. I mean, what a terrible choice. And then we had the argon laser. Fantastic. So the argon laser with pan-retinol actually made a major contribution to treating diabetes. And all of us today have benefited from those early laser studies. But the big problem today is aging. This is in United Kingdom, if you live to be 100, the Queen, in the earlier days, the King, sent you a telegram. And then, so in 1912 when it started, there were 26 people who lived to be 100. You can see there, the Queen bought a word processor in 2010, and there will be more than 1 million people over the age of 100 in the next 50 years in UK alone. And this is a worldwide problem. We're all living longer, and age is the biggest risk factor for age-related macular degeneration. So I want you all to do an experiment. Look at the person next to you and guess how old they are. It's a rotten experiment. Don't tell them and don't tell me. But it's a terrible experiment. What you're looking at is dead. The surface of the skin, the hair, that's dead. Dead cells. The surface of the cornea is alive, the surface of their lips. So we can divide our body into two. There's those cells which are constantly dividing, and here the aging process is the slow loss of the ability to make new cells until you reach a point where dead cells exceed new cells and the system collapses. Then there are other parts of our body, like our cortex and the lining of our eye, in which we're born with the number of cells that were formed during embryogenesis. We don't get any new cells. And so aging there is the accumulation of any genetic errors plus environmental stress. Students love telling professors that students have more brain cells than professors. Quite true. It's how they use them. But just think of the crazy situation we have in the eye. The retina is an outgrowth of the brain and doesn't divide. So you've got to live your retinal cells for 70, 80, 90 years and absorb radiation. I mean, what a crazy design. And that's why we have this terrible problem of age-related macular degeneration. The retina, however, has produced a system which is very clever. Whilst the photoreceptors, the rods and cones, can't divide, they do have this mechanism for remanufacturing their light-sensitive process. So every hour of every day, you're making 3 to 5 new light-sensitive discs in your rods, and every morning when you first wake up, that dreadful morning after feeling is the pigment epithelium biting the end off your rods. 4 hours into the sleep period, the same thing happens with your cones. So this process is initiated by light, leads to a problem of build-up of lipofuscin in the pigment epithelium, and the older you grow, the more you glow, because we now have autofluorescence to look at aging pigment epithelium. Okay, so the aging process in the retina, light falls on the photoreceptors, the rods and cones make new discs, the discs are phagocytized by the pigment epithelium, we get this problem of lipofuscin, which again is light sensitive, and the pigment epithelium tries to get rid of the debris into Bruch's membrane, and if you're unlucky and have a genetic defect, you get a build-up of debris within Bruch's membrane with what we describe as Drusen. Now, forgive me, I'm going to give you some hard science because everything is based on hard science here. Your retina, 90% of the metabolic demand comes from the choroid via the pigment epithelium, and it's got to pass through Bruch's membrane. So you've got all the metabolites coming in and you've got water going out. Anything that disturbs the pigment epithelium or Bruch's membrane can lead to an exacerbated aging process. And so, with my colleague Ali Hussain, we first of all measured the ability of water to pass out of the pigment epithelium as you get older. And by the age of 40, you've lost almost half of the ability. All of you sitting out there over the age of 40, When you get to 40, everything either doesn't work or leaks, and if it doesn't leak, it creaks. So aging is a terrible process. Okay, now, when we looked at all the other mechanisms, not only water transport, but amino acid, carrier transport, they're all going down as we get older. This picture here is a buildup of lipids in Brooks membrane as a function of age, and this is not white water. This is a Fatburg in a London sewer. And that is a buildup of fat, congealed fat, which is mainly your skin and soap products, in the sewers. And that's exactly the same as Brooks membrane. The big problem is lipids. The French had a lovely way of cleaning their sewers. They used to roll granite balls down to get rid of the fat. In England now we have to treat the sewers with all sorts of really toxic chemicals to get rid of the lipids. Okay, if you have a build-up of lipids in Brooks membrane, water can't get out, and in many individuals you will have pigment epithelial detachments. The water is pumped through the pigment epithelium, can't get out through Brooks, and therefore detaches the pigment epithelium. In normal circumstances, basement membranes are cleaned by matrix metalloproteases. And the matrix metalloproteases are controlled by tissue inhibitors. So if you think of Salisbury's macular dystrophy, there is a gene defect in the TIMPs, and so you don't have enough of the TIMPs, and you have a build-up of debris and a blockage in Brooks membrane. So this balance you see in terms of both, I've got a dead controller. Can you change the slide? So as we get older, you see an increase in the MMPs, which are going to clean up Brooks membrane. But unfortunately, they're released as inactive form and then converted to an active form. And although the total amount increases, there is a decrease in the active form. So as you get older, even though the mechanism is trying to make more chemicals to clean up the system, it doesn't work because it's not converted to the activated form. And what we've discovered is not only doesn't it work, but it actually contributes further to the problem. So the MMPs themselves get sequestered into large protein aggregates and further clog up Brooks membrane. Sorry, I think the battery's gone. Okay, so this control mechanism is a basic control mechanism that's going wrong in AMD. And now we've found it also goes wrong in Alzheimer's disease, and it's exactly the same mechanism that's at fault in Alzheimer's and AMD. Okay, now we've known for a long time that when you hit a retina with a laser, the pigment epithelium will migrate and release MMPs, and that will clean up Brooks membrane. But unfortunately, lots of studies, don't want to show you how clever I am, but there's a lot of science behind this. So my idea was, I don't want to do gene therapy for AMD. It's going to take too long. I don't want to do stem cells. Just think for a moment, what would happen? Normal aging, the cells start wonderfully. As you get older, the processes run down. Some of us are unfortunate enough to have a defective gene, and that changes the rate constants, and that crashes sooner. So let's not think about special gene therapy. What would happen if we could change the rate of aging? It would be great, because even if you had a defective gene, you'd probably be dead before you had any visual problems. So that's the idea of this therapy. And it's to use a laser which will initiate this active MMP to clean up the membrane, but not cause any damage to the overlying tissue. So it's a nanosecond laser, which is much shorter, obviously, than the micropulse system that's on sale at the moment. Micropulse sounds great, and it is better than all the lasers that went before it, but because it takes out a plaque of pigment epithelium, you get blockage in transport processes, and you will have secondary cell death. So the new laser has a very short pulse, so it's not conducted to any overlying tissue, and it only raises certain cells in the image to above threshold. So all the green cells there are there to look after the photoreceptors, and all the sort of black cells there actually produce the MMPs. So it's the first time that we have a laser which will have no effect. It's hitting the retina, but there's no visual effect. You won't see any visual decrement, but you will have a beneficial effect. Okay, so the laser goes in, we fire the laser, just a few cells, we have a spread, diffuse MMPs, which cleans up the system and improves the transport. And by tailoring the pattern of cell loss, we have lots more activated cells, because instead of having just around the periphery, as you would with a conventional laser beam, with this laser beam, enormous amount of MMP release to clean up the system. It was first tested on macular edema, and we published this in Retina, but more recently, we've done the lead trial, which is a trial on ARMD, run by Robin Geimer in Australia, and the results were really quite significant, because in treating ARMD patients with classical Drusen in Bruch's membrane, there was a 4-fold reduction in the rate of progression from dry to wet AMD. However, if any of the patients had pseudo-reticular drusen in front of the pigment epithelium, there was actually, the system made it worse. But it wasn't designed to do that. It was only designed to clean up the classical drusen. So we need better OCT resolution, much better than the systems we have at the moment, and we're looking at fluorophores to try and improve the system. We need better tests, because we can't do these trials and wait 3-5 years. We want to measure a direct improvement to see if we put enough of these lesions in. We're using something called fundus reflectometry, which measures visual pigments in the living eye and focal flash recovery time, which shows you that there's a beneficial effect on the pigment epithelium. So finally, I just want to leave you with the message that the news is good. We have a treatment now for dry AMD. There's lots more trials going on in different centers to see that the original trial duplicate the results. How do you get to be 100? Well, the cardiovascular surgeons will tell you that all vertebrates have the same number of heartbeats. Whether you're a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, or a mammal, you have approximately 300 million heartbeats. So if you want to use them all up quickly, like a little mouse, you die very quickly. If you want to use them slowly, you'll live a long time. So the take-home message here is, don't waste heartbeats on pointless exercise. Don't do jogging, don't do any of those things. So finally, you know, it's every English doctor wants to have a brass plaque in Harley Street. I didn't notice this until one of my students came in and said, "Have you seen your brass plaque?" So I said, "No." She said, "Well, I have, and I've circulated it." So it reads, Professor John Marshall, the London Sperm Bank. So I've lived a long time now, but I am getting tired, and perhaps it's my nighttime activity. Thank you. Sorry about that.